It's my favorite time of day. Oh, yeah, you bet I am.
Welcome to Cerebellum Studios! Follow me!
Now it's time to start the show. The mics are on, the lights are low. We know all the pronunciation. It's a learning celebration. Senoritas and senores, clap your hands and join the chorus. Lots of wit and lots of humor. Franco's dead, it's not a rumor.
There's some wackos working here. Oh!
Oh, come on!
Spain is filled with clergymen. Here is David Sternavant.
Well, you bet I am. Because I am.
Mexico has enchiladas. Just be sure don't drink the water. Learn or you'll be speaking Spanglish. Then your grave will cause you anguish. So get comfy, grab a sandwich. It's the salsarific world of Spanish. Parte dos.
Arriba!
Hi, I'm Chaz Maston, and welcome to the Salsarific World of Spanish, Part 2. Grab a cup of Colombian coffee, stick a burrito in the microwave, and prepare to sail to Gibraltar. You're about to enter the Spanish zone. Over the next couple of hours, you'll learn how to count all the way to 1,000,000 in Spanish. That'll come in handy once you're rich and you move to Puerto Vallarta. You'll learn how to tell time in Spanish, how to ask and say the date, how to talk about the weather, and how to use adjectives properly. You'll master the 3 types of Spanish verbs, and you'll know the names of the seasons, the months, the days of the week, and mucho more.
I'm here to deliver the disclaimer. In order to truly learn the intricacies of the Spanish language, you need to study hard, read your books, and go to class, right? I never go to class because I'm a jackass, but you need to. Okay, go.
Remember that we're on videotape. You can fast forward the tape through sections you already know. Pause the tape if you need to take notes, and rewind the tape if you need to see something again.
I'm talking to you from the Salsarific World of Spanish, Part 2. Make sure you understand the vocabulary and concepts we presented in the Salsarific World of Spanish, Part 1, before you dive into Part 2. If you don't, you'll be confundido.
What?
Confundido. It means confused.
I'm a woman, so I'd be confundida.
I'm confused.
Well, then you better go back and review, Slice. Here's a quick rundown of what you need to know from the Salsarific World of Spanish, Part 1.
In Part 1, we learned about the Spanish alphabet and how to pronounce Spanish letters and letter combinations. We also went over the rules of using accents in Spanish and the difference between the Spanish and English rules of capitalization.
We also learned to count from 0 to 99.
Learning how to greet people is an important skill in any language. In Part 1, you learn how to say such polite pleasantries as, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you.
We learned about articles, pronouns, and nouns. All these Spanish words have gender. They're supposedly all either masculine or feminine. But for the life of me, I still can't find any indication of genitalia on my furniture.
There are 2 verbs that mean to be in Spanish. One is the verb ser, and the other is the verb estar. In Part 1, we learned how and when to use each of these verbs.
In addition to all that stuff, there was a lot of vocabulary in Part 1 that we're going to assume that you know in Part 2. If you aren't too sure about any of this stuff, go back and watch Part 1. Otherwise... Part 1, really basic stuff. Section A, learn to count.
At the beginning of each section, we'll give you some of the vocabulary we're going to use in that section. This is the vocabulary that is not the main topic of the section. It's the additional words we use in examples. Don't hesitate to rewind and go over the words again. The vocabulary sections are easy to spot as you rewind. When you see this V graphic, you'll know what's coming up.
When you see the V, get ready for vocabulary. And when you want to rewind and review, you can easily find the vocabulary sections by looking for the V.
In Spanish, a zoo is called a zoológico.
Monkeys are called monos and snakes are called culebras. Plátanos is the Spanish word for bananas.
Plátanos.
Por favor means please.
Another word we'll use in this section is the verb I. I means there is or there are. Don't worry about conjugations or details associated with this verb right now. You'll learn all that in more advanced Spanish classes. We're telling you about it now, though, because even introductory Spanish classes use the verb I, so you should be familiar with it. Just remember, when you see I, translate it as there is or there are.
If you watched the Salsarific World of Spanish Part 1, you learned how to count from 0 to 99. Now, we'll teach you 100 to 1 million.
Remember, if you already know how to count, then learning the numbers in Spanish is just like learning vocabulary, man.
When you learned the numbers 1 through 99, you first learned to count from 1 to 29. Then you memorized the multiples of 10 and tacked on the appropriate single-digit number.
For example, to say 76 in Spanish, you say 76. 70 is 70, the multiple of 10, and 6 is 6. Remember, you have to use y, which means and, between multiples of 10 and single digits.
For the numbers between 100 and 1000, you just have to memorize the multiples of 100, then tack on the appropriate multiple of 10 and single-digit number. Here, we'll show you. Let's start with 100 through 119.
100, 101, 102.
Whoa, break for a second. There are a couple of things to look at here. First, you don't put the E after the multiples of 100. E only goes between the multiples of 10 and the single-digit numbers. We'll point that out again later. Second, did you notice that 100 is 100, but 101 is 101, and 102 is 102? That's no mistake, folks. That's how it works in Spanish. We'll explain.
When you want to say 100, just 100, the word is 100. For instance, to count from 98 to 100, you'd say 98, 99, 100. You also use 100 before a noun when you want to talk about 100 of something. For instance, to say 100 bananas, you'd say 100 plátanos.
You don't have to worry about using genders for 100. You can use masculine or feminine nouns. Also, since it's already plural, you don't have to change the form. 100 already means 100, so it's already plural.
But when you're counting numbers between 101 and 199, use ciento.
Ciento.
With an O on the end.
If you and your friend go cow tipping and you want to tell your friend how many cows there are in the pasture for your tipping pleasure, you can say, hay 100 vacas, which means there are 100 cows. If you just want to say there are 100, say, hay 100. If there are 101 cows, say, hay 101 vacas. Or you can say, hay 101. The standard deviants don't endorse cow tipping. It's messy, dangerous, and not very nice.
Now let's run through numbers between 101 and 119. Between 101 and 109, use ciento with the single-digit number you need, like this.
101, 102, 103, 104, and so on up to 109. It's real easy.
Notice we didn't use Y between ciento and the single-digit number. You don't need it there like you do when you tack a single-digit number onto a multiple of 10, like 52, which means 52. Now we'll show you the numbers 110 to 119.
110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120.
Just tack ciento onto the numbers 1 through 99, which you've already learned, right?
Those of you who haven't learned the numbers 1 to 99, go back to part 1 and review. Those of you who have, quit gloating.
Now we'll show you the multiples of 100. Then we'll practice writing some numbers with the multiples of 100.
As we go over them, notice that all of the multiples of 100, starting with 200, end in S. That's because when you do a literal translation of the Spanish numbers, you say 100, then 200s, then 300s, then 400s, and so on and so on. When there's more than 100, well, you say hundreds in the plural form. Pay attention.
200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900.
There's a gender issue with the numbers between 200 and 900. When you use these numbers before a noun, the hundreds place number has to agree in gender with the noun. Only the hundreds place number has to agree in gender. Here's an example.
Hay 216 monos y 642 culebras en el zoológico.
Let's look closely at how the number 216 works with the noun monos.
How do we do that? We do it by ending the word with os. The S is always there since we're talking about 200s, and the O makes it masculine. Notice it's only the multiple of 100 that has to match in gender with a noun. None of the other components of the number change to match gender. Now we'll look at the number 642 as it's used with the noun culebras.
Culebras, which means snakes, is feminine, so we end 600 or 600 with AS. The A makes it feminine to match culebras, and the S makes it plural. Only 600 has to match in gender with culebras. 42 does not.
We'll say it one more time. The hundreds places between 200 and 900 will always be plural, so they will always end in S. Just make the ending AS to go with a feminine noun,
Or OS to go with a masculine noun.
Hey, now you can count to 900 with style and grace. Here comes 1,000. Now, the word for thousand in Spanish is mil. Now, don't confuse this with the English word million. In Spanish, you count the thousands just like you do in English. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and so on, like this.
1000, 2000, 3000.
There are two things to notice here. First, when you're talking about more than 1,000, meal doesn't become plural like the hundreds place number does. The thousands place numbers translate like they do in English, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and so on.
The second thing to notice is that when we wrote numbers in the thousands, we used a period instead of a comma after the thousands place. That's the way Spanish speakers generally write the numbers, with periods instead of commas.
It's just another one of those conventions you have to get used to. Here's what 100,000 looks like.
100,000.
100,000 uses 100, which means 100, before 1000, which means 1,000. Use the form 100 rather than ciento because you're talking about a single hundred.
The number 102,000 would be 102,000. In this case, you use the form ciento for 100. It's just as if you're counting between 101 and 199. Anything over 100 is ciento. With numbers in the thousands, you're just tacking the mil on the end to indicate a number in the thousands.
A customer says his chimichanga isn't cooked enough.
It's ridiculous. Just throw some hot sauce on it and give it back to him. Yeah, give it to me. Stupid will never know the difference. For numbers 200,000 and above, you use the appropriate multiple of 100 before mil. Okay, it's as easy as, putting a little hot sauce on it like this. Hey, give it back to him.
200,000, 300,000, 400,000.
400,932. We pitched you a curve with that last number. Remember, you're counting just like we do in English. Just learn the vocabulary. That last number breaks down like this.
400,932.
The Spanish word for million is millón. When you get into millions, you have to make millón plural, since you're talking about more than 1 million, like you did with hundreds. The plural of millón is millones. Notice the singular form of the word has an accent, and the plural form does not.
So that's really all you need to know about millions. It's easy, man, right? All you need to do is tack on the number of millions to the word millón or millones. That's it. It's simple. Check it out, man.
1,000,000, 2,000,000, 16 millones, 492 millones, 300,945.
Just think about how you put numbers together in English, and keep in mind these simple rules.
When you want to say 100, just 100, the word is 100. When you're talking about more than 100, starting with 101, use the word ciento. Starting with 200, the hundreds places get an S on the end like 200, 300, and so forth.
One more thing about the hundreds place numbers is that if they are paired with a noun, they have to match in gender with the noun they modify.
For the thousands place numbers, use the word mil to indicate thousands, whether you have one or more thousands. The thousands place number does not become plural when you have more than 1,000, nor do you have to consider gender with the thousands place numbers.
Millions are also very easy. A single million is millón with an accent, and for more than 1 million, use the word millones.
Section B, time dripping.
Hey, keep in mind, you're not learning intergalactic moonman language here.
This is Spanish. Things like counting and telling time and talking about seasons and dates. And they work more or less the same way in Spanish as they do in English. It's really just the words, the vocabulary, and a few little details that differ. I mean, it shouldn't turn your brain to salsa or nothing. I love salsa.
There are only 3 vocabulary words in this section in addition to the stuff we'll teach you about telling time.
Camarero means waiter. A waitress is called a camarera. Just add an A on the end.
Marzo is the word for the month of March, and septiembre is the word for September. We'll go over the names of the months in detail later in the video.
Now let's tell time.
To ask the time, say, ¿Qué hora es?
Camarero, por favor. ¿Qué hora es? Es la una. Gracias.
Here's how to say the time in Spanish. Use the correct form of the verb ser, and then say the hour. Like when our waiter said, es la una, which means it's 1 o'clock.
Una, which means one, is singular, obviously. So we use the third-person singular form of the verb ser, which is es, and we use the singular article la. The hours of the day are considered feminine, so we use the feminine article la and the feminine form of one, which is una.
You'll remember from the salsarific world of Spanish, Part 1, that verbs ser and estar both mean to be.
Ser is usually used when you talk about permanent situations or characteristics, and estar is usually used to express locations as well as situations or characteristics that are likely to change.
So you may wonder why we use the verb ser to express time. It seems to make sense to use estar, since estar is usually used for situations that are not permanent, and time changes every second. Cast away logic, follow the convention, and use ser. That's just the way it's done.
Usually, when you're telling time, you'll use son las to express the time. The only time you'll use the singular forms es and la is when you're talking about a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30. Why? Because all the other numbers besides 1 are plural, and son is the third-person plural form of ser. Las is the feminine plural article that you need to match the plural number and plural verb.
Yeah, that's obvious enough. But why don't you use es la to express the time between 1:30 and 2 o'clock?
Let's practice with the plurals a little more first.
¿Qué hora es?
Son las 4. Son las 11. Son las 6. ¡Ay!
We're running into another one of those situations where the literal translation from Spanish to English sounds kind of funny. Son las 6 translates roughly to it's the 6. That sounds odd to English speakers, but hey, what's up with the o'clock business that we use? It's all what you get used to.
Let's take a few moments to learn the origin of the phrase o'clock. When clocks were first becoming popular in English-speaking countries, not everyone remembered to use them. So often a person would say to another, "What is the hour?" And the other would reply, "The hour is late." Upon receiving an annoyed look from the questioner, the person answering would often realize, "Oh, clock."
Hey, when you want to talk about a fraction of an hour, there are a couple of ways to do it.
To say it's a quarter after 11, say, son las 11:15.
Which means it's 11 and a quarter. You know, like 11 and a quarter of an hour. Cuarto means quarter. Don't confuse it with cuatro, which looks and sounds similar but means 4. Here's another way you can say it's a quarter after 11.
Son las 11:15, which means it's 11:15.
On the half hour, you say,
Son las 11:30.
Which means it's 11 and a half. Media means half. It's kind of like when we say it's 11:30. Or you can say
Son las 11:30. which means it's 11:30.
So what if it's exactly 22 minutes after 6?
You'd say, son las 6:22. To express the time between the top of the hour and half past the hour, just say the hour and add on the appropriate number of minutes after the hour.
If you want to say a time that's after the half hour, you say the upcoming hour and use the word menos, which means minus, to show how many minutes it is before the upcoming hour. It sounds confusing when I just sit here and talk about it, but it's very easy. Here's what I mean.
To say it's 7:50 in Spanish, say son las 8 menos 10. That means it's 8 o'clock minus 10 minutes. It means the same thing as saying it's 10 minutes before 8 or 7:50.
Remember earlier when we said that you'd only use the singular es la when you're talking about a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30?
That's because when you express a time between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, say 1:45 for example, you'd say son las 2 menos cuarto. That roughly means it's 2 minus a quarter. 2 is plural, so you have to say son las instead of es la. Remember, you can only use the singular forms es la when you express a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30.
Now do you understand?
Can we have another example?
No.
Oh, come on!
All right, fine.
Es la 1:25.
That means it's 1:25.
Son las 2 menos 25.
That means it's 1:35.
Oh, he can be taught.
Now let's learn how to ask the date.
Today is May 6th, the day of your Spanish exam.
What day is today?
Here's how to ask what day's today in Spanish.
Dios mío, ¿qué fecha es hoy? Hoy es 6 de marzo, el día de tu examen de español.
Let's examine these sentences closely. Que is the question word that means what. When you use que as a question word, you have to put an accent over the E. We'll talk more about the question words later. Fecha is a Spanish word for date. Es is the third person singular form of ser, one of the verbs that means to be. And hoy means today. ¿Qué fecha es hoy? Means what date is today.
Now let's go over the reply. Hoy es 6 de marzo. Hoy es means today is. We translate ses to the 6th, but actually it literally translates to 6. In Spanish, the word sexto actually means 6th, but they don't use that word when they express the date. They just use the number itself. Seis or ocho or whatever.
After the number of the day, we use the preposition de to mean of before we name the month, marzo. And as you learned in the Salsarific World of Spanish Part 1, you don't capitalize the names of the months in Spanish.
Spanish speakers are flexible people. Just like in English, there is more than one way to ask the date in Spanish. Here are a few more ways to ask what day it is. Some of the questions and replies don't translate exactly. We've given you translations that are close English equivalents.
¿Qué fecha estamos, Victoria?
Hoy es 15 de septiembre.
¿Qué día es hoy?
Hoy es 15 de septiembre.
¿Y cuánto estamos, Victoria?
Estamos a 15 de septiembre.
It's my birthday.
Let's review. To ask the time, say, ¿Qué hora es? To give the time, use the correct form of the verb ser, followed by the article la or las, followed by the hour. Most of the time, you'll use the plural verb and article son las to express the time. The only time you'll use the singular forms es la is when you're talking about a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30. This is because all the other numbers besides 1 are plural, so they take a plural verb and article.
When you express a time after half past the hour, say how many minutes it is before the next hour by using the word menos, which means minus. There are several ways to ask the date, including ¿Qué fecha es hoy? And ¿Qué día es hoy?
Section C, small talk or how to talk about the weather.
If you ever find yourself waiting in a doctor's office or an elevator with a Spanish speaker, you'll need to know how to talk about the weather. Why? Because all humans, regardless of language or place of origin, are genetically programmed to talk about the weather when they have nothing else in common to talk about. Okay, that's a lie. But it's useful to know how to talk about the weather anyway. First, here's some vocabulary.
Oh man, I feel a nor'easter coming on.
The Spanish word for weather is tiempo, and the word for climate is clima. You can tell that tiempo is a masculine word because it ends in O. Clima ends in A, so it's feminine, right? Wrong! Clima is an exception, a freak, a quasimodo of a word. Clima is masculine, even though it ends in A.
Clima is masculine, even though it ends in A. Memorize it. And while you're at it, here's the rest of the vocabulary for this section.
Tormenta means storm. Hielo means ice. Granizo is hail. And ropa interior means underwear. Mucho means much or a lot.
And malo means bad.
That's it for the vocabulary. Let's move on to how to express the weather. When we talk about the weather in English, we say it's sunny or it's cold. We use it, a genderless singular pronoun, and is, which is the third person singular form of the English verb to be. In Spanish, sometimes you use the to-be verb estar to talk about the weather. We'll teach you how and when to do that in a minute. But with some weather conditions, Spanish speakers use the verb hace, which is the third person singular form of the verb hacer, which means to make or to do.
When you want to say it's cold, it's hot, it's sunny, or it's windy, use the word hace plus the weather condition. We'll explain.
To say it's cold, say hace frío. Here we go again with a funny translation thing. It literally means it makes cold, but don't get hung up on that. Just learn it. To say it's hot, say hace calor. It's sunny is hace sol, and it's windy is hace viento.
Hace implies it, or some third-person non-specific entity, so you don't need a pronoun. In fact, there really isn't a pronoun that means it in Spanish. It is implied by the non-specific third-person singular verb. Don't stress about the details. Just remember to use hace with these specific weather conditions. It's hot, hace calor. It's cold, hace frío. It's sunny, hace sol. Or it's windy, hace viento.
To say it's raining, it's cloudy, or it's hailing, you use the verb está, the third-person singular form of estar, plus the weather condition. This construction is easy because it's very similar to English. Like with hace, you don't have to use a pronoun because está implies a non-specific third-person subject. After está, you plug in the weather condition in its gerund form. A gerund is the ing form of a verb. Like when we say it's raining in English, the verb to rain is in its gerund, or ing form. Raining. We won't teach you details about forming gerunds in Spanish right now. Just learn how to say these weather conditions for now, and you'll learn more about forming other gerunds when you take more Spanish. To say it's raining, say está lloviendo. The verb to rain is llover. The gerund, or ing form of llover, is lloviendo. Está lloviendo. It's raining. To say it's hailing, say está granizando. The verb granizar means to hail. The gerund form of granizar is granizando. Está granizando. It's hailing. The verb to snow is nevar. To say it's snowing, say está nevando. Nevando is the gerund or ing form of the verb nevar. It's snowing. Está nevando. Remember, just memorize these gerund terms for now so you can express the weather. You'll learn about gerunds as you study more Spanish.
In Spanish, degrees are called grados. You can express temperature in grados Fahrenheit using the Fahrenheit scale like we do in the United States, or you can express temperature in grados centigrados, which are degrees Celsius. Remember, most of the world uses the Celsius scale. We just like to be different here in America.
So now, practice making some sentences with words that relate to the weather. Many of these words we gave you in the vocabulary at the beginning of this section. If you don't remember these words, simply stop the tape and rewind and review them.
La tormenta es muy mala. Está lloviendo mucho. La tormenta es muy mala. Está lloviendo mucho.
Está nevando. Hay hielo en las calles. Está nevando. Hay hielo en las calles. Hace frío. Hay granizo en mi ropa interior. Hace frío. Hay granizo en mi ropa interior.
Let's review. In Spanish, they use the verb hace and está to talk about the weather. Hace, the third-person singular form of the verb hacer, which means to make or to do, is used with the weather conditions hot, sunny, cold, and windy. Hace calor means it's hot. Hace sol means it's sunny. Hace frío means it's cold. And hace viento means it's windy. The verb estar is used when you want to say it's raining, it's snowing, or it's hailing. For these weather conditions, follow the verb está with the gerund form of the verb for the weather condition. So to say it's raining in Spanish, say está lloviendo. To say it's snowing, say está nevando. And if it's hailing, say está granizando.
Part 2. Some grammatical stuff. Section A, using adjectives.
There are several issues you have to consider when you use adjectives in Spanish. You already know that Spanish nouns are considered either masculine or feminine, and they can be either singular or plural.
The adjectives which modify the nouns have to match the nouns in gender and in number. In other words, if the noun is masculine and plural, the adjective has to be masculine and plural as well. Also, the placement of adjectives in Spanish sentences is usually different from the placement of adjectives in English sentences.
We'll explain all of this in detail, so hang in there. First, here's the vocabulary you need for this section.
Sucio means dirty.
And limpio means clean.
Débil is the Spanish word for weak.
A gato is a cat.
And feo means ugly.
Pájaro means bird, and tortuga means turtle.
The adjective alto means tall.
I am a conejo.
Ratón means mouse.
And desagradable means disagreeable.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
I stand corrected.
You've learned a little bit about adjectives already, but we need to go over some more rules about them. Remember, it's essential that your adjectives agree in gender and number with the nouns they modify.
For example, if an adjective modifies a noun that's singular and feminine, the adjective must also be singular and feminine. If an adjective modifies a noun that's masculine and plural, the adjective must also be masculine and plural.
A feminine adjective ends in A, and a masculine adjective ends in O. This is generally true of the nouns they modify as well. If you need the adjective to be plural, just add an S on the end.
Remember, these are general rules. All languages break the rules sometimes.
Pay close attention to the endings of the following adjectives.
I am dirty.
Estoy sucia!
Sucia is an adjective that means dirty. Since Rosa is a woman talking about herself, she uses the singular feminine form of the adjective.
Hey, how can you tell that sucia is singular?
There's no S at the end.
Oh, yeah.
We are dirty.
Estamos sucios!
Now there are two idiotas in the mud. Rosa is referring to both herself and Manuel. Sucios is the masculine plural form of the adjective. You can tell it's plural because it has an S on the end. Rosa uses the masculine form because Manuel is a man. When one or more of a group is male, use the masculine form of adjectives.
They are clean.
Están limpias.
Limpias is an adjective that means clean. Manuel the mud boy is referring to women, so he uses the feminine form of the adjective. Notice the A in limpias. And since he's referring to more than one woman, he uses the plural form of the adjective by adding an S to the end of it. Okay, so we went through the whole thing about adjectives ending in A or O. Here comes the monkey wrench. There are a few Spanish adjectives that either end in E, such as triste, which means sad, or end in a consonant, such as débil, which means weak.
When you use an adjective that ends in E, such as triste in its singular form, you can keep the E ending regardless of whether the noun it modifies is masculine or feminine. You only have to consider the numbers. If your noun is plural, just add S to the adjective. Triste would become tristes if it modified a plural noun.
Examples! Examples! We must have examples.
She is sad.
Ella está triste.
The subject ella is singular and feminine, so we use the singular form of the adjective triste. The e ending remains just e. If both of the people at the table were sad, we'd say, ellos están tristes. Now we have a masculine plural subject, ellos, so we add s to the adjective triste. It doesn't matter that ellos is masculine. Since triste ends in e, you don't have to consider the gender of the subject, only the number, singular or plural.
We use the verb estar when we talk about my deep sadness. Because I'm not going to cry over spilled milk anymore. The condition was temporary. Now we'll show you an adjective that ends in a consonant.
Débil is an adjective that means weak. When you use this adjective with any singular noun, use the form débil, regardless of whether the noun is masculine or feminine. If your subject is plural, use the plural form débiles. Since débil ends in a consonant, you have to add es to make it plural. You can't just add s. That's just the way they do it in Spanish.
Gender just doesn't matter with adjectives that end in a consonant. You only have to match the number, singular or plural.
So far, we've been practicing sentences that put the adjective after a verb, like he is weak. Él es débil. Sometimes adjectives go right beside the noun they modify, like in the phrase, the ugly cat.
In English, we put the adjective ugly before the noun cat. In Spanish, the adjective usually goes after the noun it modifies. The phrase, the ugly cat, would be el gato feo. The adjective feo, which means ugly, goes after the noun gato, which means cat.
If the cat was a girl, it wouldn't be el gato feo, it would be la gata fea.
La gata fea.
Let's get a little more practice using the proper forms of adjectives. Now we're going to move pretty fast, so grab the remote so you can pause or rewind if you need to.
The intelligent mouse.
El ratón inteligente. The bad birds.
Los pájaros malos.
The fast cows.
Las vacas rápidas.
The tall turtle.
La tortuga alta.
The handsome chickens.
Los pollos guapos.
The disagreeable rabbit.
El conejo desagradable.
So now you know a lot about Spanish adjectives, but you're about to learn even more.
Yeehaw!
Section B, demonstrative adjectives.
Here's another vocabulary section. You'll be learning a lot about farm animals, man.
Toro means bull.
Apestoso is an adjective that means stinky. Stinky cheese.
And oveja is a sheep.
Estúpido means stupid. And muy means very. This turkey's muy estúpido.
Hey, I take offense to that.
Hombre means man.
Mujer means woman.
In English, when we want to point out an object, a place, or a person, we sometimes use words like this, that, these, or those. When these words are used with a noun, they're called demonstrative adjectives.
Demonstrative adjectives are adjectives because they indicate something about the noun they modify or describe. They're called demonstrative because they demonstrate or show you what or who is being referred to. Spanish uses demonstrative adjectives too.
Like all Spanish adjectives, demonstrative adjectives have to agree in gender and number with the noun they modify. Let's take a look at these things. Actually, we're going to look at this and these first. Then we'll look at that and those, and then maybe we'll check out those over there. Got it? You will.
This and these generally refer to something that's right in front of you or immediately accessible.
Here are the Spanish demonstrative adjectives that mean this and these, as in this foot or these feet. The masculine singular word meaning this is este, and the masculine plural word meaning these is estos. The feminine singular word meaning this is esta, and the feminine plural word meaning these is estas.
If you want to refer to this bull right here in front of you, to say this bull is stinky, you would say, este toro es apestoso. Use this demonstrative adjective este because bull or toro is masculine and singular.
And este is a masculine singular demonstrative adjective.
Since all bulls stink, you may want to say, these bulls are stinky, referring to the whole stinking herd. You would say, estos toros son apestosos. Notice that when we make the sentence plural, every word becomes plural. Estos is a masculine plural demonstrative adjective. Toros is a masculine plural subject. Son is a third-person plural form of the verb ser, which means to be. And apestosos, which means stinky, is an adjective in its masculine plural form because it's modifying a masculine plural subject, toros.
If you want to refer to this particular sheep to say, this sheep is very stupid, you would say, esta oveja es muy estúpida. Use the demonstrative adjective esta because sheep, or oveja, is feminine and singular. Esta is the feminine singular demonstrative adjective.
Now, while sheep are cute and fuzzy and all that, you have to admit that none of them are bright. In light of this, you may want to refer to the whole herd and say, these sheep are very stupid. You would say, estas ovejas son muy estúpidas. Notice that, again, all the words in the sentence took on their plural form when the subject became plural, except for muy, which means very. Muy does not have or need a plural form.
Notice in the sentence, estas ovejas son muy estúpidas. We use the verb ser as our to be verb. That's because the stupidity of sheep is a permanent condition. They won't just get over it and wake up smart tomorrow morning.
Here's another thing to think about. The demonstrative adjectives está and estás look a lot like the second and third person singular forms of the verb estar. But there's one crucial difference, and you should remember what it is.
The verb forms está and estás have accents over the A. The demonstrative adjectives esta and estas do not.
Now we'll talk about that and those. As in English, that and those generally refer to something relatively nearby or accessible, but not necessarily whatever's immediately in front of you, like this and these do. It's like when you say, that pile of dirty laundry, as opposed to this pile of dirty laundry.
If you want to say, that man is crazy, you would say, ese hombre está loco. Ese is the masculine singular demonstrative adjective that means that. Notice we use the verb estar as our to-be verb in this sentence. That's because craziness isn't a permanent condition in this case. Here come his friends. Now you want to say, those people are crazy. So you'd say, esos hombres están locos. The group consists of only men, so we use the masculine plural form of the demonstrative adjective esos, as well as the masculine plural form of the adjective locos.
The feminine singular adjective, which means that, is esa.
So if you want to say that woman is sleepy, say, esa mujer está cansada. And if her female classmates are in the same condition, you'd say, esas mujeres están cansadas, which means those women are sleepy. Let's examine the sentence. Esas mujeres están cansadas. Esas is a demonstrative adjective that means those. It is feminine and plural because it modifies the noun mujeres, which means women. The word mujer is feminine, as you might expect since it means woman, but it does not end in an A. It's one of those exceptions that you have to memorize.
To make mujer plural, you can't just add s. You have to add es. When you make any noun which ends in a consonant plural, you have to add es. If the noun ends in a vowel, like most do, you can just add s. Next is the verb están, which is the third person plural form of estar, which as you know by now means to be. Why do we use estar instead of ser in this sentence?
Because as soon as class is over, we won't be sleepy anymore.
Right. Sleepiness is a temporary condition, so you use the verb estar. Finally, the adjective cansadas, which means sleepy, is feminine and plural to match the subject mujeres.
There's another demonstrative adjective used in Spanish that we don't really have an equivalent for in English. It means that over there, implying something that's farther away or more remote than this or that. The masculine singular form of this one is aquel. Let's go back to the bull field and we'll show you how to use it and its variations.
As you know, this bull is stinky. Este toro es apestoso. And that bull is stinky. Ese toro es apestoso. Well, that bull way over there is stinky too, so you'd say, aquel toro es apestoso. In fact, all those bulls over there with him are stinky. The masculine plural form of aquel is aquellos, so you'd say, aquellos toros son apestosos.
To point out the one stupid sheep across the field, you would say, aquella oveja es estúpida. She's standing in a huddle of stupid sheep across the field, so to include all of them in your sheep derision, you'd say, aquellas ovejas son estúpidas, because aquellas is the feminine plural form of the demonstrative adjective aquel.
Hey, it's review time. Like all Spanish adjectives, demonstrative adjectives have to agree in gender and number with the noun they modify. The demonstrative adjectives this and these generally refer to something that's right in front of you or immediately accessible. The masculine singular word meaning this is este, and the masculine plural word meaning these is estos. The feminine singular word meaning this is esta, and the feminine plural word meaning these is estas.
As in English, that and those generally refer to something relatively nearby or accessible, but not necessarily whatever's immediately in front of you. Ese is the masculine singular word that means that, and esos is the masculine plural form that means those. The feminine singular adjective, which means that, is esa, and esas is the feminine plural word that means those. There's another demonstrative adjective used in Spanish that we don't really have an equivalent for in English. It means that over there, implying something that's farther away or more remote than this or that. The masculine singular form of this one is aquel, and the masculine plural form is aquellos. Aquella is the singular feminine word that means that over there, and aquellas is the feminine plural form.
Part 3. Verb that word.
As in English, verbs in Spanish are used to describe an action, except Spanish speakers call them verbos instead of verbs.
Verbos. That's masculine and plural.
That's correct. Thank you. Anyway, to use verbs in Spanish, you have to learn how to conjugate them.
Spanish verbs are organized into 3 categories: those that end in AR, those that end in ER, and those that end in IR. Each verb has different verb endings. You choose which ending you need to match the verb's subject. For example, if your subject is nosotros, or we, then you need to use the verb ending that matches nosotros. Hang on. We'll go into all the details in just a minute. The verb endings are a little different for each of the 3 categories of verbs: AR, ER, and IR. We'll show you how to conjugate regular verbs in each of the categories.
Regular verbs are those which you can conjugate by following a predictable pattern. Once you learn the patterns, you can conjugate any regular Spanish verb, even if you don't know what the verb means. We'll begin with verbs that end AR.
Section A. AR verbs in the present tense.
Here's your next dose of vocabulary. And here's a spoonful of sugar to help it go down. The Spanish word for shower is ducha.
Here's another kind of shower. The word lluvia means rain. Trabajo means work, like the place you work or what you do for a living.
Todo means all or everything.
The phrase a través de means through, as in get it through your head.
And pared means wall. Walls are very hard.
Tren means train.
A lectura is a reading or a lecture.
Okay, let's get started. Don't get too wound up about this whole verb thing. Regular, predictable verbs are easy to deal with.
Let's start with these 2 obvious points about AR verbs in the present tense. AR verbs are verbs that end in the letters AR, and present tense verbs indicate action that's going on right now.
Do you hear that? Action that's going on right now.
To learn Spanish verbs, you just have to learn what each verb means, which is just a matter of memorizing vocabulary. And you have to memorize the verb endings and know when to use them. Verb endings match in person and number with the subject, letting you know who's doing the action. Each subject pronoun, I, you, he, we, they, and the others, has a verb ending that corresponds with it.
Here are the endings that go with AR verbs: o, as, a, amos, and an. When you use these endings, drop the AR off the end of the verb and add the appropriate ending that matches your subject. Hang in there. You'll understand better as we conjugate a few verbs.
Here's the first one. Let's conjugate the verb cantar, which means to sing. The highlighted letters are the verb endings. When you add a verb ending, drop the AR at the end of the verb, but keep the stem of the verb. In the case of cantar, C-A-N-T is the stem, and AR is the ending that gets dropped.
The verb ending that goes along with yo is o. I sing is yo canto. The ending that goes with tu is as. You sing is tú cantas.
Usted, the formal version of the pronoun you, works like a third-person singular pronoun using the verb ending a. In this case, you sing would be usted canta. The third-person singular he sings or she sings is él canta or ella canta. The pronoun nosotros and its feminine counterpart nosotras use the ending amos. We sing is nosotros cantamos or nosotras cantamos.
Ustedes, the plural you, uses the ending an. Ustedes cantan means you all sing. And finally, the third person plural pronoun ellos and ellas use the an ending as well. They sing is ellos cantan or ellas cantan.
We're using the pronouns to show you the verb conjugations because it's easy and convenient. Keep in mind that the pronouns stand for nouns of a particular number and often a particular gender. Saying George and Henry sing is the same as saying they sing. So you'd use the same verb form you'd use with ellos. You'd say George and Henry cantan. Now, let's practice with the verb cantar in a few sentences.
I sing in the shower.
Yo canto en la ducha.
They sing in the rain.
Ellos cantan en la lluvia.
You sing in class?
¿Usted canta en la clase?
So let's go over the conjugation of cantar one more time.
Yo canto. Tú cantas. Usted, él o ella canta. Nosotros o nosotras cantamos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas cantan. The endings are o, as, a, amos, and an.
Cool. Now let's go over another AR verb, escuchar, which means to hear or to listen to. Here's the conjugation of escuchar.
Yo escucho. Tú escuchas. Usted, él o ella escucha. Nosotros o nosotras escuchamos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas escuchan.
Escucho el tren.
Escuchan el teléfono.
Remember, the verb form that matches the formal pronoun usted will always be the same as the third person singular verb form, the verb form that goes with él or ella.
Likewise, the verb form that matches the plural ustedes is always the same as the third person plural verb form, the one that goes with ellos or ellas. So you'd say ellos escuchan to mean they hear, and you'd say ustedes escuchan to mean you all hear. We used an AR verb as an example, but this is true for ER and IR verbs as well. You'll learn to conjugate those verbs in a moment.
One more time. Let's go over the verb endings that are used with the AR verbs.
O, as, a, amos, an.
Section B, ER verbs in the present tense.
Here's the vocabulary for this section.
An edificio is a building.
Ardillas are squirrels. And pantalones are pants.
Now let's take a look at the next category of verbs, the ones that end in ER. If you understand how to conjugate the AR verbs, these will be a piece of cake. They work almost exactly the same way. We'll show you the endings for ER verbs, then we'll give you some examples. Notice the similarities between the way the ER and the AR verbs work.
The ER verb endings are o, s, a, emos, n. Now take another look at the endings of the AR verbs. They are o, as, a, amos, an. The only difference between the two is the A and the E. Other than that, the conjugation pattern is the same for both types of verbs.
Now let's look at an ER verb, Comer means to eat. The stem of the verb is com, and er is the part we drop when we conjugate the verb. Yo como, tú comes, usted, él o ella come, nosotros o nosotras comemos, ustedes, ellos o ellas comen. We eat squirrels. Comemos ardillas. He eats buildings. Él come edificios. They eat pants. Comen pantalones.
Let's conjugate one more ER verb. The verb beber means to drink. It follows the regular conjugation pattern of an ER verb, so, just like in the previous examples, we will drop the ER at the end and add the appropriate present tense ending.
Yo bebo. Tú bebes. Usted, él o ella bebe. Nosotros o nosotras bebemos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas beben.
So once again, let's go over the endings for ER verbs.
O, es, hemos, en. O, es, hemos, en.
Section C. IR verbs in the present tense.
Now on to the final category, the IR verbs. Again, the endings for IR verbs are almost identical to the endings for ER verbs, but not exactly, so pay close attention. First, let's go over the new vocabulary you'll need to know for this section.
Lago means lake.
Grande means big.
And granero means barn.
Here are the endings of the IR verbs. O, es, hemos, en. Notice that most of the endings are just like the endings of the ER verbs, with the exception of the nosotros ending, which is the only form that uses an I.
Now let's go through the conjugation of the verb vivir, which means to live.
Yo vivo, tú vives, usted, él o ella vive, nosotros o nosotras vivimos, ustedes, ellos o ellas viven.
I live in a big city.
Vivo en una ciudad grande.
We live in a lake.
Vivimos en un lago.
They live in a barn.
Viven en un granero. Meh, meh.
Here's another example of an IR verb, grunyer, which means to grumble. Remember the N with the tilde over it is pronounced like nie. Let's start with the conjugation of grunyer.
Yo gruño, tú gruñes, usted, él o ella gruñe, nosotros o nosotras gruñimos, ustedes, ellos o ellas gruñen.
Spanish is used in,
You grumble.
Usted gruñe.
We grumble.
Gruñimos.
I don't grumble. No gruño.
Notice that the first person singular or yo form uses the O ending for AR, ER, and IR verbs.
Yo uses O.
It doesn't matter what kind of verb you're talking about. Yo uses O.
Section D. The irregular verbs tener and querer.
Before we leave the verbs, let's go over an irregular verb that you'll use frequently. The verb that means to have in Spanish is tener. But first, you know what's coming.
The word jugadores means players. Football sounds like football, and it really is. But to Spanish speakers, football or football is what Americans call soccer. Jugadores de football is soccer players.
And abuelo means grandfather.
Tener is an ER verb, but it's an irregular verb, so it doesn't exactly follow the predictable pattern of keeping the stem, dropping the ER, and adding the appropriate verb ending.
Tener is called a stem-changing verb. That means that when you conjugate tener, you can't just retain the stem, ten, and add the appropriate ending. With stem-changing verbs such as tener, the letters in the stem of the verb change when you conjugate it.
Hey, irregular verbs can be a little freaky, so you should just figure on memorizing which verbs are irregular and what each of their forms are.
Here's the conjugation of tener, which as we said means to have. As we go through it, pay attention to how the stem of the verb changes.
Yo tengo. tú tienes. Usted, él o ella tiene. Nosotros o nosotras tenemos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas tienen. Notice there's a sneaky G in the yo form, and an I makes its way into all the forms except the nosotros form. These oddities make tener an irregular verb.
You just have to memorize the forms of irregular verbs, turkeys.
Now let's talk a little about usage. Spanish speakers use the verb tener, to have, in different ways than we use to have in English. For example, in Spanish, tener is used to express age. This is different from the English convention of using to be to express age. In English, we say, I am 20 years old. The Spanish way of expressing age translates loosely to, I have 20 years.
Tengo 20 años. Here's how to ask someone's age in Spanish. ¿Cuántos años tienes? It literally means, how many years do you have? Oh, and by the way, when you say or write the word año, make sure to use the ñ with the tilde over it.
Cuantos means how many. Años means years, and as you know, tienes is the second person singular form of tener, the verb to have. Remember to use 2 question marks when you write a question, one upside down at the beginning and one right side up at the end.
¿Cuántos años tienes?
Tengo 86 años.
Eres joven. Tengo 105 años, pero soy fuerte.
Spanish speakers also use tener to describe a certain physical state, such as hunger or thirst. Again, in English, we use the verb to be in these situations. We say, I am hungry. In Spanish, say,
Tengo hambre.
which translates to I have hunger. It sounds funny, but just get used to it. Translate it as I am hungry, because really it means the same thing.
I am thirsty in Spanish is tengo sed. Yeah, I know. It means I have thirst. But, that's a convention in Spanish, you know that?
Of course, if you are referring to someone other than yourself, you just use the correct form of tener.
For example, if you want to say, the soccer players are thirsty, say, los jugadores de fútbol tienen sed.
Here are some other common uses of the verb tener.
Él tiene frío.
Oh, wow.
Tengo dolor de cabeza.
That one literally translates to, I have pain from head.
Usted tiene mucho estrés.
Ellos tienen rosas del jardín.
Okay, one more time. Here's the conjugation of tener.
Yo tengo. Tú tienes. Usted, él o ella tiene. Nosotros o nosotras tenemos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas tienen.
Now let's go over another irregular stem-changing verb. The verb querer means to want. So, as you can imagine, the verb is used a lot. The conjugation of querer is pretty similar to the conjugation of tener, but not exactly the same, so pay close attention. Again, querer means to want.
Yo quiero. Tú quieres. Usted, él o ella quiere. Nosotros o nosotras queremos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas quieren.
Notice that when you conjugate querer, the stem changes from Q-U-E-R to Q-U-I-E-R. Its conjugation is similar to tener, but the first-person singular form of tener is tengo, with a G. The first-person singular form of querer is quiero, no G. Let's practice the verb querer in a few sentences.
¿Quieres un taco? No, quiero 3 tacos.
One more time. Here's the conjugation of querer.
Yo quiero. Tú quieres. Usted, él o ella quiere. Nosotros o nosotras queremos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas quieren.
Part 4. A little more grammar and some easy stuff.
Section A. Just say no.
Negative statements and sentences are constructed differently in Spanish than they are in English. For one thing, sometimes you get to use a double negative. And in Spanish, it's grammatically correct.
All right. Here's the vocabulary we'll use in this section.
Pescado means fish.
And aquí means here. Right here.
That is all for now. You are dismissed.
We're not going to start with the double negative stuff. We'll save it for a minute. Let's start with this simple rule. In Spanish, the negation words, such as no or never, go right before the verb. Here's what we mean.
By the way, in Spanish, the word no can mean either no or not.
No quiero pescado.
In the sentence, no quiero pescado, notice that the first word of the sentence is no. No is the negation word. It lets you know that the speaker is negating the action of the verb, which immediately follows the negation word. The verb quiero implies the subject yo, so we don't need to write yo. Quiero implies yo because it has the o verb ending, and only yo, the first person singular verb form, uses o.
The word tampoco means neither. Here's where we get into the double negative stuff. Not only are double negatives, like not neither and not never, allowed in Spanish, they're positively necessary. Here's an example.
Él no quiere pescado tampoco.
In this sentence, él no quiere pescado tampoco, we start with the subject pronoun él, because the verb form quiere can be used with any third person singular subject or with the formal pronoun usted. So we specify the subject. Next comes the negation word no, right before the verb quiere. Pescado is the direct object which follows the verb. Dig around in your brain and remember what a direct object is. In this case, it's the thing the subject doesn't want, the fish. Next comes our second negation word, tampoco.
As we said, tampoco means neither. So, if we were to translate our sentence literally, it would say, he does not want fish neither. That sentence is way wrong in English, but it's just ducky in Spanish. When you use a negation word like tampoco or neither, you still have to put the negation word no before the verb.
Here are a couple more examples of negation words that work like tampoco. Nadie means nobody. Nada means nothing, or not at all. And nunca means never.
No hay nadie aquí.
Oh, okay. Do you have a cup of sugar I could borrow?
No. No tenemos nada.
Okay. Oh, sorry to bother you.
Escucho al tren.
In the sentence, no hay nadie aquí, no and nadie are both negation words, so the sentence literally translates to, there's not nobody here. Just get used to the construction and translate it as, there's nobody here. It works the same way in the sentence, no tenemos nada. The word no and nada are both negative. The sentence translates literally to, we don't have nothing. But remember, in Spanish, it has to be that way. Translate this sentence as, we don't have anything.
Well, there just ain't nothing you people don't know.
Section B, possessive adjectives.
Here's the new vocabulary we're going to learn in this section.
Pulpo means octopus.
Ofensivo is the Spanish word that means offensive.
Spanish speakers call me a roca.
Padre means father.
And padres means parents.
Libro means book.
A motocicleta is a motorcycle.
And extraño means strange.
Now on with the possessive adjectives. We just learned the verb tener, which means to have. When you say you have something, you are expressing possession. There are other ways to express possession in both Spanish and English. Possessive adjectives.
I am a possessive adjective, and this is my stuff. You may not use it, so do not ask.
In English, we use words like yours, my, his, theirs, and ours to show possession. These words are adjectives because they tell you something about the upcoming noun. They tell you to whom it belongs.
The English possessive adjectives are my, your, his, her, and their. In Spanish, they are mi, tu, su, and nuestro or nuestra. Notice that the possessive adjective tu does not have an accent over the u like the pronoun tu does. This is a case where the accent indicates a particular meaning rather than a particular pronunciation.
Mi means my.
Tu is the informal version of your. Su is the formal version of your, and su can also mean his, hers, or theirs. The only possessive adjective we'll go over that has gender is nuestro, and its feminine form nuestra, which means our.
Spanish possessive adjectives work very much like their English counterparts. For instance, mi is used just like my in English. To say my dog, you'd say mi perro. Notice that unlike most Spanish adjectives, these possessive adjectives go before the noun they modify.
Most adjectives follow the noun as in the phrase el pulpo ofensivo, which means the offensive octopus. If you added a possessive adjective to the phrase, you'd say mi pulpo ofensivo.
So, possessive adjectives go before the noun they modify, and that makes them a little different from most adjectives, but they're not totally different, mind you. You remember how to handle adjectives.
Yeah, cook them thoroughly so you don't get salmonella, huh?
No, I think that's what you do with poultry.
Spanish adjectives have to match in number and often in gender with the noun they modify. This holds true for possessive adjectives as well.
For example, in English we can say my car, or we can say my cars. The same possessive adjective my works with either a singular or a plural noun.
In Spanish, the possessive adjective has to match the noun it modifies. If you have one car, you say mi. Mi is a possessive adjective and carro means car. If you have two cars, the possessive adjective has to become plural as well to match the noun it modifies. You'd say mis carros. It's really very easy. You just have to remember to add an S to the end of both the possessive adjective and the noun. They have to match. It's like coordinating your wardrobe. Here are some examples.
Mi roca, mis rocas. Tu padre, tus padres.
The possessive adjective su and its plural form sus go with the formal pronoun usted. If you're talking to your professor and you're referring to her book, you would use the possessive adjective su.
Su libro. Sus libros.
Su and sus also go with ustedes, the plural you, as well as with él, ella, ellos, and ellas. So su can mean your, his, hers, or theirs.
So really, su libro can mean his book, her book, their book, or it can mean your book if you're using usted, the formal version of you. Since su has so many meanings, make sure your audience knows who you're talking about.
Who are you talking about?
Make yourself clear.
Why are you so vague?
Let's get them!
The thing to remember about possessive adjectives is that, in number, they have to match the thing which is possessed, not the possessor.
The possessive adjectives refer to the possessor, letting you know who the possessor is. But the gender and number of the possessive adjective itself is dependent upon the gender and number of the thing which is possessed, not on the possessor.
Like in Spanish, if you say his motorcycle, the possessive adjective his modifies the noun motorcycle. In Spanish, his motorcycle would be su motocicleta. Mi motocicleta.
So if you're talking about his socks, plural, rather than a single sock, you have to say sus calcetines. The possessive adjective matches the noun it modifies. In this case, the plural noun socks is being modified, so the possessive adjective also must be plural. Just add s.
The adjectives for our are nuestro, the singular masculine form, nuestra, the singular feminine form, nuestros, the plural masculine form, and nuestras, the plural feminine form.
Nuestra hija es muy extraña.
Notice that in the example, nuestra hija es muy extraña. The possessive adjective nuestra is singular and feminine, to match the singular feminine noun hija that it's modifying. You should also notice that the adjective extraña, which means strange, is also in its singular feminine form, to match the noun hija.
Nuestros hijos son extraños también.
Sí,
In this example, we use the masculine plural form nuestros to match the masculine plural noun hijos. Again, notice that the adjective extraños is in its masculine plural form in this sentence to match hijos.
Let's review what we just learned. In Spanish, possessive adjectives have to match the noun they modify. If the noun is singular, then the possessive adjective must be singular. If the noun is plural, then the possessive adjective must be plural. The possessive adjective, which means my, is mi, and its plural form is mis. Tu is the possessive adjective that means your, and tus is its plural form. Su is the adjective that goes with usted, so it's the formal your, and the plural form is sus. Su can also mean his or hers, corresponding with él and ella. And again, the plural form is sus.
Nuestro is the singular adjective that means our. Unlike the other possessive adjectives, nuestro expresses gender, so you use it with the masculine form of the pronoun nosotros. Nuestros is the plural masculine word that means our. With the feminine nosotras, you'd use nuestra, and its plural form is nuestras. Ustedes, ellos, and ellas all use the possessive adjective su in the singular and sus in the plural. With ustedes, su or sus means your, and with ellos or ellas, it means their.
Section C, the seasons, the months, and the days of the week.
As the earth turns like grids through the hourglass, so are the seasons, months, and days of our lives.
First, let's talk about the seasons.
No, first let's go over the vocabulary, then we'll do the seasons.
Amor means love.
Aire means air.
The Spanish word for people is gente. Playa means beach.
Leaves are called hojas.
The word hoja, which means leaf, is not to be confused with the word ojo, which means eye. Let's take a moment to go over the difference.
Ojo. Hoja.
Ojo.
Hoja.
Got that? Good. And finally, here's one more of those useful phrases for you to memorize.
Otra vez, por favor.
Otra vez means again or another time.
Otra vez, por favor.
The spring is la primavera. En la primavera, el amor está en el aire.
The summer is el verano. En el verano hace sol y hay gente en la playa.
The autumn is el otoño. En el otoño las hojas son bonitas. And winter is el invierno. En el invierno nieva.
One more time!
La primavera.
El verano.
El otoño.
El invierno.
Now let's go over how to say the months. By the way, you don't capitalize the months in Spanish. They're spelled with lowercase letters.
Enero, febrero, marzo, abril, mayo, junio, julio, agosto, septiembre, octubre, noviembre, diciembre.
Say all the months one more time?
No.
Come on.
All right.
Enero, febrero, marzo, abril, mayo, junio, julio, agosto, septiembre, octubre, noviembre, diciembre.
Okay, now it's time to learn the names of the days of the week in Spanish. We'll run through them quickly first, then we'll make some sentences with them using the new vocabulary words we just learned. Notice that in Spanish, you don't capitalize the names of the days of the week like we do in English. Getting tired yet?
Yes.
Tough.
In the Spanish-speaking world, the week starts with Monday instead of Sunday, which really makes a lot of sense if you think about it. So, here are the days of the week, starting with Monday.
Lunes, martes, miércoles, jueves, viernes, sábado, domingo.
Otra vez, por favor.
Lunes, martes, miércoles, jueves, viernes, sábado, domingo.
In English, if we want to indicate something that happens Monday, we generally say on Monday. We use the preposition on with Monday. That's our conventional way of indicating the day of the week. The convention in Spanish is different. Instead of using a preposition, they use the article el. They always use el rather than la because all the days of the week are considered masculine and, of course, singular. It sounds funny if you're not used to it, but think about it.
On Monday is pretty weird, too. You just never give it a second thought because you're, like, used to it.
Languages are like hats. They vary from one group to the next. Each has its own set of rules and conventions.
Yes, we'll repeat the days of the week.
Lunes, martes, miércoles, jueves, viernes, sábado, domingo.
So that's it. Now you know enough to visit Tijuana and sound like a foolish American trying to speak Spanish. Just kidding.
Now you have the tools you need to ace your Spanish exam.
And you've learned lots and lots more stuff.
So look for more mind-expanding video course reviews like anatomy, astronomy, English composition, calculus, and much, much more.
From
The Standard Deviants.
Bye-bye. Bye.
See you downtown to Cowtown.